emancipated from the chains of the past. Upon my return home in the afternoon, I had a strong feeling that my wife, Tamarka, was still out with a friend. Hence, instead of ringing the doorbell, I unlocked the door with my own key. As I took my first step into the hallway, I overheard voices coming from the kitchen, tinged with a hint of tipsiness. Oh, could it be the groomsmen arriving to line up? A female voice, somewhat unfamiliar, exclaimed, followed by laughter. Do you think they'd come to my place to marry you? Tamarka playfully replied, prompting more laughter. Oh, Petrovich, it's you? Zoya, my wife's friend, said, a little disappointed as she glanced at me. Realizing that I had interrupted their gathering, I joked, I suppose if I had arrived a couple of hours later, I would have found the groomsmen here. Zoya responded, sit down, Petrovich, you'll add some male presence to our female company, patting the chair beside her. What surprised me more was not only the fact that the girls were indulging in a drink without any apparent occasion, but also Zoya's behavior. Over the years, I had known her as a gloomy, unaccommodating, and even emotionally restrained woman. She rarely visited anyone unless the gathering consisted of a small and very close group of people. Moreover, I had never seen her drink even a single drop of alcohol, not even the weakest wine. Yet there on the table sat a half-empty bottle of wine, and a second one stood near the table leg. I accidentally touched it when I sat down. Zoya herself radiated confidence and joy. I couldn't determine if something exciting had happened in her life or if the alcohol had influenced her demeanor. I washed my hands and joined the ladies. Well, Petrovich, you're a good man. It's a pity you're taken, Zoya said with a hint of sadness, yet a smile, as she handed me a sandwich with sausage and cheese. Listen, do you have any widowed friends? Decent ones, I asked cheerfully. Well, the list of decent individuals isn't that extensive, but if you're looking… By the way, girls, what's the reason behind this impromptu gathering, if it's not a secret? Tamarka answered joyfully, Zoya's grandchild was born 3 days ago. Zoya chimed in, handing me another sandwich to replace the one I had just devoured. In a couple of days, our little bundle of joy will be home. Congratulations from the bottom of my heart. Have you already chosen a name for the baby? I inquired. We're leaving it up to the parents to decide. My job as a grandmother is to agree with whatever the son and daughter-in-law come up with, Zoya replied contentedly. Well, then I'm confused. I continued, munching on my sandwich. What kind of grooms are you expecting? Reliable, decent, and responsible ones. Zoya replied triumphantly. Tomka, pour some more. Let's drink to them. As far as I knew, Zoya had never been married and generally kept her distance from men. She didn't entertain suitors and avoided all sorts of romantic entanglements. Although we hadn't known each other since we were young, mutual friends had always portrayed her as someone who shied away from relationships. Some were even surprised that Zoya had managed to have a son, speculating that perhaps she had become pregnant almost miraculously, given her aversion to men. And now, just a couple of years ago, we had celebrated her 55th birthday together. There wasn't even a hint of her desiring a partner. It was a modest gathering with a few friends, her son and daughter-in-law. I wasn't sure whether it was appropriate to ask a tipsy lady questions or if I should wait for her to sober up. However, Zoya didn't seem intoxicated enough to reveal secrets she wasn't ready to share when sober. I made up my mind to inquire about the reasons behind her change in behavior. I didn't truly believe that the birth of her grandchild was the sole cause. I could have waited until Zoya left and questioned Tomka, but a quick exchange of glances indicated that my wife was also clueless. Therefore, after some time, I listened to a fascinating life story. You, Petrovich, are like an X-ray, always seeing through things. Sometimes I think you're a psychic and an inquisitor rolled into one. Like a psychic, you sense something interesting, and then, like an inquisitor, you pursue it. And the best part is that you know how to listen and always treat things with understanding. And as you like to say, joy must be shared. So here I am, sharing. Just sit back and listen. You know, I've experienced firsthand that everyone goes through turning points in their lives. It's not that I didn't believe it could happen. I simply thought there must be certain prerequisites or circumstances leading to such pivotal moments. For me, the turning point began with a home renovation, or to be more precise, when we replaced the windows. When we learned that my daughter-in-law, Irma, was going to be a mother, we decided to spruce up the apartment. I gave the children my room and moved into theirs. We did some fresh repairs. About a month before the due date, my son, who is already 36 and expecting his first child, a son, brought up the issue of drafty windows. I understood his concern. He wanted everything to be perfect for Ermachka and the baby. We decided that it made sense to replace the windows in both rooms, as well as the kitchen, instead of just one. Initially, they promised to install the windows within 2 weeks, but the deadline passed, and they said it would take another week, and then more. When Ermachka was 5 months pregnant, the doctors informed us that she would need a cesarean section. Considering today's standards, she was an older first-time mother at the age of 34. That's what they call women who plan to become mothers for the first time when they're in their mid-30s. Anyway, they called and said they were finally taking the windows, coinciding with the day we were to take Ermachka to the hospital. The doctors had recommended she stay in the hospital for 5 days before the operation. Consequently, I accompanied Irma in a cab to the hospital. Throughout the day, Zhenka, my son, called me every half hour, asking questions like, "Have you arrived yet?" Or, "Is she in her ward?" Or, "Is everything all right?" And when I called him back to let him know that his wife was settled in her ward and everything was fine, Zhenka said, "Take a stroll, Mom. It's noisy and dusty here. They'll finish everything, and the cleaning company will come afterward to tidy up." So I returned home, thinking Zhenka was just anxious about the impending birth of his child. If only I had known. Then came the due date and the birth. In the hospital, we learned. The table was set, and I asked Zhenka, should we sit down or wait for our guest? My son replied that we could start since he was very hungry, and the guest would join us later. As we began our meal, a conversation unfolded. "To be honest, Mom, I have a surprise for you," Zhenka began, wearing a satisfied expression. "I hope it's a pleasant one." "You know I don't like surprises," I replied hesitantly. "You should prepare me for surprises." "I did prepare you. Well, at least a little," Zhenka continued. "Do you remember the window installation? It's one of those accidents that are not accidents moments. I thought those only happened in movies." "Don't keep me in suspense. Tell me." I interrupted impatiently. No, I said just a small hint. You'll find out everything soon enough." Just then, the doorbell rang and Zhenka, abandoning his fork, hurriedly rushed to the entrance. Sitting there, I could hear Zhenka inviting someone to wash their hands and join us in the kitchen. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom, and Zhenka returned to the table, wearing a contented expression. "Well, hello, Zonka," a middle-aged man whom I didn't recognize greeted from the kitchen threshold. "Hello," I politely replied, studying his scared and wrinkled face. "Don't recognize him?" the man asked, still standing at the threshold. "But I recognized you instantly. Come in, have a seat." Zhenka gestured towards the chair prepared for our guest, keeping himself busy. "Mom, here's my surprise." "I don't understand, son. What's the surprise?" I said, glancing once again at the guest. "You really should have been more thoroughly prepared for surprises," Zhenka sighed with satisfaction. "I was waiting for the window installer, and I waited. He happened to see the picture in your room. You know, the one Irma and I gave you for your anniversary, where you are depicted as a queen. He immediately asked, 'Who is it? Zoya?' I didn't explain anything. Then, during the ride with the window installers, we had a conversation. Papa Midya told me that you two had a falling out when you were young, and he was afraid you wouldn't forgive him. but I promised him that I would give you a chance to make amends. As I cast another glance at the guest, I felt a sudden numbness. Yes, his face had changed, but his eyes, faded, haunted. Nevertheless, I felt fear, horror, and anger all at once. I was at a loss for how to behave and what to say. I had always believed that someday we would cross paths again, but it turns out I wasn't prepared. Zonka, you haven't changed at all, the guest said with a smile that I found utterly unpleasant. What did Midia tell you? Did we have a fight? I tried to gather myself and speak as confidently as possible. You two probably need to talk to each other. It's been so many years since you last saw each other. My son stood up from the table, intending to leave. Sit down, I sharply interrupted Jenka. I won't stay alone with this man. And perhaps it's time for you to learn about your father. You're an adult now, and you can judge who is right, if there's even a right or wrong. When you were a child, I didn't want to lie to you, so whenever you asked about your father, I would tell you. When you grow up, you'll find out. Well, you've grown up now, so it's time to know. I began my story from the very beginning, or more precisely, from the summer between my 3rd and 4th year at the technical school. That was when I met Midia. Instead of spending the summer at my parents' village, I decided to work a little to earn some money before my final year. That's when I crossed paths with Midia. He was handsome, charismatic. I couldn't help but wonder why he would be interested in a modest, inexperienced village girl. But he courted me relentlessly. Walking me back to the dormitory, he spoke of our future, saying that once I graduated, we would marry and have children. It was the end of September. Midia's mother, Agnesa Karpovna, had gone down south for the late tourist season, and Midia. He convinced me to visit his home. He said I would see where we would live after the wedding, that we would watch TV together. When we arrived at his apartment, or rather, his room, it felt like stepping into a fairy tale. He had arranged everything meticulously. On the coffee table in the living room, there were various cakes, grapes, candies, and a bottle of champagne. Midia proudly mentioned that there was even ice cream waiting for me in the refrigerator. We started watching TV, and then the champagne appeared on the table. I had never even smelled alcohol in my almost 18 years of life. I declined it then too, but there was something enchanting about Midia. Pouring champagne into my glass, he retrieved a bottle of vodka from the bar, stating that the fizz was for ladies while real men deserved a proper drink. I don't know who got tipsy faster, him or me. I don't recall how many times he refilled my glass, or how many times he refilled his, snacking on grapes. The more he consumed, the less he resembled the caring and pleasant Midia I knew. Then he began to force himself upon me. We had never even kissed before, but there, he forced himself upon me. All I remember from that time is his frenzied eyes, the overwhelming smell of alcohol, my mouth forcibly silenced, the pain and the bitterness. Since then, I've despised alcohol. That champagne was the first and last alcoholic beverage I've ever had. I could have left when Midia fell asleep. The next day, he showed up at the dormitory, waiting for me after school. His face bore guilt, and he apologized. I felt that I could never forgive him. Yet he insisted that we had merely moved our first wedding night to an earlier date. After a couple more encounters, I promised to consider forgiveness, but he had to earn it. Midia pledged that there would be no more guests or solicitations until the wedding. He was older, already working as a trucker. When I found out I was pregnant, Midia was away on a trip. I was scared. I thought it best to go to my parents, so to speak, to inform them. I am their late-in-life and only child. When I turned 18, my parents were already in their 60s. My party-minded father and ever-obedient mother reacted differently than I had expected. My father gave me a month to bring Midia for them to meet, and he gleefully submitted a marriage registration application. He threatened that I would bear the consequences otherwise. I eagerly awaited Midia's return from his trip. I wanted to tell him that I had forgiven him, and I never went to my parents' house after a month or even two. Instead, I found myself facing the daunting decision of what to do with a child in my arms after graduating from technical school. It was clear that my parents had disowned me when my belly started to show. My father declared that I no longer had parents because I had brought shame upon them. My mother cried, but she followed my father's lead. I never saw them again. To my surprise, when I returned to the village with my child, my parents were gone. The neighbors informed me that they had sold their house and left without leaving a forwarding address. I had no idea where they were, whether they were alive or not, or where they might be buried. I even tried to search for them through Wait for Me, a television program, but my efforts were in vain. I gave birth at the end of June, and I found myself at a loss. Where could I go? I made what I believed to be the right decision at the time. I went back to Midia's home. However, he was away on another flight, and his mother, who had never met me before, was skeptical of my stories. Fortunately, she did not turn me away and stayed with me until Midia returned. In the weeks leading up to his arrival, she asked me countless times about the situation, and I shared the same truth with her each time, holding nothing back. Agnesa Karpovna, Midia's mother, remained indifferent toward the child, stating that they would sort things out once Midia was back. Midia arrived close to midnight. I overheard my mother greeting him at the doorstep and informing him that I had been living there for several weeks. He barged into the room assigned to me, shouting so loudly that my mother asked him to lower his voice to avoid waking the neighbors. He then proceeded to berate my mother for allowing a whore into their home, demanding that she immediately kick me out. Agnesa Karpovna took pity on me, stating that there was nowhere for a woman to go at that time of night. The following morning, the doorbell rang. All I could hear were Agnesa Karpovna's wails and the voices of men. Soon after, Agnesa Karpovna burst into the room. It turned out that Midia had filed several rape complaints, and she believed that I was one of the people involved. Despite my attempts to defend myself, none of my excuses succeeded. I found myself on the street with my child in my arms. I had no home, no parents, and no reliance on the child's father. As I later discovered, he had been imprisoned for rape. Hoping for a stroke of luck, I returned to the technical school dormitory where I had graduated. I pleaded with them to let me stay for a few days while I sorted out my housing situation. With few students around during the summer, my few days turned into a month, and I still hadn't resolved my housing issues. How could I? I had a child in my arms and no job. Fortunately, luck smiled upon me. While waiting in line at the pediatrician's office with my baby, I met Xenia. We'd had given birth around the same time and had crossed paths at the maternity hospital. She seemed so happy while I felt like I was drowning. Either out of desperation or who knows what, I confided in her. To my surprise, she offered to let me stay at her place. Her husband was a long-distance captain, so she was alone in the apartment with their child. It would be more fun to have company, she said. On that same day, I moved in with her. While Xenia looked after her child and mine, I managed to find a job. Soon after, I secured a hostel from the company and moved out. Eventually, I obtained an apartment through my workplace, but that came later. During that time, I lived with a determination never to experience what I had gone through before. Since then, I never allowed another man into my life. Whenever someone showed interest in me, I would recall Midia's frenzied eyes, the scent of vodka, and the physical and emotional pain. This had been my way of life, protecting my son and ensuring he would never become like his father. Whenever my son asked about his father, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to lie and paint a picture of a brave submariner, cosmonaut, or Arctic explorer. Yet, telling the truth was daunting. I was afraid. I was afraid that Midia would reappear in my life, forcing me to explain everything. I feared how my son would perceive me. I was afraid of being a bad mother. Fear permeated my existence, leaving little room for happiness or even a smile. "So, Mitya, you claim we had a fight?" I asked, attempting to sound as confident as possible. "I just shared my story with you." "You? Mom, I'm sorry," said my son as he returned to the table. "Why?" I asked, surprised, finally looking at my son, who now had a ashamed expression, avoiding eye contact. "Well, for the surprise? Mom, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry," he muttered, remorse evident in his voice. "Son, there's no need to apologize. In fact, I should thank you," I replied, realizing that my son would not judge me. For nearly 4 decades, it has weighed heavily on me, but now I feel like I've finally let go of the chains of the past. It's as if I've been underwater all these years, holding my breath and lacking oxygen, and now I've surfaced and taken a deep breath. "Really, Mom?" He looked up at me, his eyes filled with hope. "Yes, really," I answered, a sense of relief washing over me. We talked until the early hours of the morning, about everything and nothing. The most important realization I had was that I had raised my son well. We agreed to keep Mitya's arrival a secret within our family. I hoped that Irma and my grandchild would never have to meet Mitya. It's been 3 days since then, Petrovich, but it feels like I've lived 5 years. Zoya concluded her story, turning to me. "It feels like I've only just started truly living. Even though I've become a grandmother on paper, is it really true? Or is Zhenka just lying?" "Zoya, my son is not lying to you, I can assure you of that," I responded, my tone serious but with a smile. "So what now? Do you have any decent widowed friends?" Zoya asked again. "I think it's time for me to get married. What do you think?" "I think we will find you a suitable partner, and we can start looking tomorrow," I replied, equally serious. The 3 of us continued chatting, losing track of time. We didn't even notice when Zhenka called, worried about his mom being out at 11 p.m. When he heard her slightly tipsy voice, which he had never heard before, he instructed me to wait until he arrived to take her home. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I have been convinced time and time again that fears often hinder our happiness, particularly the fear of being misunderstood by those close to us. However, the most important thing is that happiness can come at any age. After all, no one can say that happiness arrived too late or without reason. I have known Zoya for many years, and I can say that the changes in her behavior and state of mind are nothing short of remarkable. Her newfound positivity has even energized me, and I genuinely believe that everything will turn out well for her. I will do everything in my power to help her find a suitable partner.